I'd like to then transition to our featured speaker of the day, Dan Richards. Hi, Dan.
G'day. How are you, Easton?
Have you had enough coffee yet over there?
Oh, barely.
Barely. So we're just really to quickly introduce. So Dan and I met through the Nuffield Scholarship Program. Dan's a Nuffield Scholar from 2016. Did I get that date right?
Yep.
Hope so, because I pulled it from your website. I happen to be a scholar from 2023, and last June I was able to visit Dan's farm in person and see all the great things that he's doing in producing barramundi. But not only the farm itself, but what really led me to bring Dan in was just his overall leadership style, the way that he and his family approach business, the values, and in particular how he treats people. And I just would be remiss if I didn't share that more broadly, which is really the purpose of this webinar today, and a compliment to you, Dan. So I'm excited to just catch up, and this will be the most informal of all of the informal webinars that we've done. But I think that in order to kick this off, we'll share a quick video, and then we'll just jump into a chat. So hopefully everyone can hear the sound. If you can't, please comment, or Dan, you wave at me, but I think we had it working before. So here we go, short video.
Humpty Doo Barramundi's out here on the edge of the Adelaide River floodplain. We've got a big crocodile-infested river right next to us that's full of dinosaurs, and it's got amazing salt water, and we're surrounded by all sorts of fantastic wildlife. You can't.
Loving the environment here. It's a beautiful natural environment on the banks of the river here, and we're on the sweet spot in the floodplain where the flood doesn't get too deep. A lot of the challenge has been to develop the farm while ensuring that we protect the magnificent natural environment we live in.
And both Dad and I have got environmental science, environmental management backgrounds, so care of the environment's really important for us. We've created this great saltwater wetland that's surrounding us now. And what that does is enable us to bring in salt water from the Adelaide River right next door, and then reuse that water again and again to enable us to have a consistent supply of, beautiful, clean saltwater fish.
In the early days, we had very low volumes of fish, and they were small plate-sized fish, and we would gill gut scale the fish and deliver them. 6 fish to this restaurant, 10 to that restaurant, and you'd walk into the kitchen on a Thursday night and the chef would be there. And one of the things that really came out was the passion of the chefs and their concern about consistent quality, good shelf life, presentation, and they are artists, and they take pride in what they do, and they demand good standards in the product they want. And that was a really important lesson for us in understanding what we have to do at our end to make sure the supply chain can deliver right down to chefs and the home consumers exactly the same.
Being a family business, we've created a family of people here working with us. We've got work every day of the year, so we've got a great team of people, and we're really proud to be able to share the opportunities that we're creating here with other Territorians, because it's a great thing to be part of.
You have to be dynamic. You have to be a continuous improver, always looking for ways to do things better. Learn what the customer's needs are, find better ways of getting the product there. It's relentless, and part of that is growing big. That was my vision, but I didn't really know exactly how I was going to get there, but I knew that's where it had to go.
We're doing what we love doing here. Being able to work in this environment, wild place with a great group of people and with beautiful animals, producing them for the Australian consumers is something that we're really proud of. So I guess I'm doing what I love, and that's something I couldn't be happier with.
One of the things I really love about barramundi is that they've got real character. You can understand why they're such an iconic fish. I mean, for the fishermen, they jump and fight and so on. They get stuck in billabongs and live there, wait and endure until the wet season gets here. And it's their zest for life, and everything they do really gets to you. They're fighters, and they're great eating too.
I hope that gives you a little bit of the flavour of where we're at anyway, Easton.
It's very helpful. I'm motivated. I'm gonna get practicing some didgeridoo though, so I can
Yeah.
videos. Well, thanks, Dan, for sharing that and making time again. It's early over there, and I can't be grateful enough for you taking time out of your busy day, maybe starting your day with us. But if you could help our group get to know you personally just a little bit better, and maybe introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
For sure, yeah. So I'm CEO of Humpty Doo Barramundi. I've got an environmental science background, and I worked in environmental management in the corporate sector before I got into went and joined Dad in the farming business. So that was a really good grounding in putting environmental management at the front of what we do, as well as that corporate background. And Dad had the environmental regulation background. So it's all about really looking at creating the right environment for your animals that works with your regulators as well as the biology of the animals to deliver a really high quality, consistent product that is required to be able to develop a market.
Excellent. And could you help everyone understand, Humpty Doo, first of all, best name of a fish farm I've ever heard in my life, but maybe the history of the company overall, like how did you and your dad get started? And I know you've grown tremendously from the start. So can you talk a little bit about that evolution?
So interestingly enough, we're on the site of what was a large failed agricultural venture from the 1950s. I think there may have been Rockefeller money behind the development at the time. There was a number of large-scale agricultural developments done here in Australia with the view to then sell them off to Australian farms to operate. The more successful of the two was the Esperance wheat growing area. It's in the southwest of Western Australia, and an area with very consistent rainfall and good soils, and that's become a wonderful success. The Humpty Doo venture growing rice out here on the floodplains was less successful. And we're here in the top on the north of Australia, not too far from Indonesia and East Timor. We're halfway between our capital city, Darwin, and Kakadu National Park, where Crocodile Dundee was filmed, in the middle of some pretty wild country, close enough to services, but far enough to be able to have scale. So that's kind of the background. We'd come off the back of having witnessed, so in the top part of Australia, in the top half of Australia, there's only about 3% of the population. The centre of Australia is a big desert mostly, and most of the population is down in the southeast. And we're about 4,000 kilometres from most of the population. So we're in a place, whatever, a number of times bigger than Texas, and there's about 250,000 of us. So it's a different part of the world to the States. And we had seen, but people come and they see the space, and think, wow, everything's big. We could do something big. And we've seen again and again large-scale agricultural ventures that have, set up. Recently, someone wanted to build the biggest prawn farm in the world, shrimp. And it recently went into receivership. So people get really excited about the idea of doing things big, but they will often try and start too big before they have actually understood what the nature of the challenges they have to face are. And so then when they make mistakes, they make them at such a scale that surviving those mistakes is difficult. And so we see it again and again. And in a government that is starved for development opportunities and the like, they can't help but support these ventures, but then the likelihood of them succeeding is pretty low. So it's a bit of a cycle. And the venture on our farm failed in 1958, and I saw a report from 1982. So 40 years later, that's talking about the lessons of what had gone. Sorry, it was 30 years later, but looking at the it said there's a lot of lessons that could be learned from the failure of the Humpty Doo rice project, but as a result of the subsequent failures of every project that's happened since, it appears that the lessons have been hard learned. And another 40 years later, the same thing is continuing on. So it's really interesting to see. Yeah, we're now 70 years since that project started, and governments tend to keep supporting huge scale projects that haven't done their homework. So we took an alternative approach. Dad had the pleasure of sitting in on the postmortems of a number of those big failed agricultural ventures, and so we took an alternative approach, which, starting from a very small base, as you said, we were initially growing just 6 kilos of fish a week, so we could have eaten it all at home. We at that point, there was obviously no cash flow. We had no knowledge. We had no money. We had no idea what we were doing, but we were very passionate and basically set about with a conscious. But at the time, the differential between the cost of feed and the achievable price for the product in the market was a very significant differential. So there was profitability possible. So the challenge was to overcome the challenges and achieve scale. Now we're in a much more mature industry. Obviously, the volumes are huge and the profit margins are a lot smaller. But that's where we started. So with our few kilos of fish, we'd clean them in the backyard and deliver them to restaurants and get a good price, but small volumes. As we move forward, so we started off with like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the business around survive, learn, and then grow. So in our case, surviving is keeping your people safe. We live with crocodiles and electricity and water and all of these sort of things. Keeping your animals safe. If you don't have animals, you're not a farmer, and don't run out of cash. If we do those 3 things, you're still in the game. So then you can move to the next level, basically. So then huge investment in learning. Dad undertook a Churchill Fellowship in 2002 when the business was already 9 years old. So we'd been through a lot of those survival when establishing base infrastructure and base systems, but then was able to get exposure to the global aquaculture industry. Developing in isolation, he probably hadn't initially realized the sophistication and complexity of the global industry. So being able to get out and have a look, that was really valuable. And off the back of that, developed the wetland system that helped to mitigate a lot of the variable water quality in the river that we're on. Sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not. And as a flow-through operation, that was a risk to the business. So that was really valuable. And so and we do lots of trials, and we bring the best people in the world to come and help us solve problems, and we build prototypes, and we look at how cheaply and quickly can we answer a question or learn something. So we have a culture within our organization which is quite bold in terms of someone's got an idea and we say, is that a real opportunity? If it looks like it has the remotest chance of being so, how quickly can we learn that? Would the person who had the idea like to be in charge of testing it and come back and report? And we're not really fussed whether the trial is a success or not, because it's all part of learning. So as long as they go through the exercise properly, some of these things are transformational, some of them contribute to the learning, and some of them are just about empowering the person to test their ideas. And every now and again, there's a gold nugget there that really moves the dial for the organisation or the industry. And so that's kind of how we have rolled. Once you've learnt those lessons, then applying those lessons again and again, whether it's just through modular development or on a bigger scale, is relatively low risk, because you've survived, you've learnt the lessons, and then you're just applying them. So that's been a formula that we've used successfully in the development of our industry. So. We're now just recently signed up a contract to provide some enterprise skills development to local Indigenous oyster growers who are in an emerging industry with lots of aspirations. And we've, basically going to be coaching them in how to apply that in their circumstances, because we're in a place where 30% of the population is Aboriginal, 30% of the politicians are Aboriginal, 98% of the land has Aboriginal ownership of some form, and 80% of the coastline. So the success of and there's a lot of unemployment, substance abuse, social issues, and the like within that significant part of the population. And so we think that doing what we can to try and make sure they are benefiting from the opportunities that are emerging would be a good thing for everybody.
Excellent. Well, you just gave me about 7 domains of threads to pull on. So I'm gonna take it back just a bit to the evolution. So you started with 6 kilos a week. Can you give the audience a scale of where we are today? Because I know you have a large part of the market, and could you just give some flavor to that?
For sure. So sorry, I probably only told half that story. So we're in a business that has, and initially from that tiny base, grew hundreds of % per year and all of that, but that wasn't very meaningful from such a small base. But basically, we've had a compound annual growth rate of around 30% for around the last 30 years. So what that means today is that we're doing about 150,000 kilos of fish instead of 6 kilos, so well over 20,000 times bigger than we were in our first year of operation. So that journey, it's basically been a journey for us. It's an adventure that we're on, and it's required constantly adapting and learning. We've undertaken a business growth training for our team, for our leadership team, to look at what stage of the development of the business do the leaders have to stop doing the things that they used to do and start doing new things to enable the business to grow and thrive. So if you're someone who has started the business and has done everything yourself, you achieve a scale not too far down the line where that doesn't work anymore. And so then it's about learning to delegate outwards, and then you get to a scale where that doesn't work anymore, because you become the bottleneck to everyone waiting to hear from the genius. The genius with 1,000 helpers, they call that, and that doesn't last very long either. As the business grows into the next phase, then you need to empower people, and now we're really at the continuous growth phase, where my role is very much more external than internal. We've got 150 people, everything from a genetics partnership with the with the CSIRO as our federal government science agency, right through to so we've got the genetics, we've got the breeding, we've got all the processing, we've got marketing, sales and marketing people in the larger cities around Australia. So it's the full integrated value chain. In some cases working with partners, but basically from the genetics through to branded product on the plates and in supermarkets around Australia. So we've got exclusive national contracts with Woolworths. That's the largest retailer in Australia. With Costco, someone I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with. We've got the exclusive Australian contract to supply Australian barramundi into those guys, as well as some large food service players. So we've currently got about 45% of Australian domestic barramundi production. And we've done that in an environment where we have competed with the likes of Marine Harvest and the like, who set up a sea cage farm near to us, but a hurricane took them out a few years later. But obviously that was pretty daunting as a small startup operator to have the biggest aquaculture company in the world set up down the road from you. But the natural environment here is fairly aggressive, and it sorts out a lot of these things. So.
Very helpful. So part of, I think, what I was I really admired was, and you've already spoken to it, there's been a few, granted a hurricane is less of a predictor or something you can predict of a business failing. Others, scale too large too quickly. And, I noticed even in I think it was in your nursery, you had built the entire facility to be modular and that you knew where you were today, but you had positioned it for that long-term success. Could you speak to that just as a strategy, or maybe embellish on my limited knowledge of that facility?
Absolutely. So we've done that in a couple of different cases. So that's about maintaining a focus on the vision of where the business would like to go, because in a business that's growing, it's really easy to paint yourself in a corner and find that, gee, if only I'd thought about I was going to have to increase this scale again in the future, I would have approached it in a different way. And so, or sometimes we might acknowledge that we're developing something, but we don't have all of the knowledge and it's likely going to need to be changed. So you mentioned nurseries. So I've got a small one that I actually developed to solve a supply chain issue for Costco, but it was a new system for us. And so we didn't and still haven't actually put concrete on the floor because we knew we were going to have to dig up the plumbing and change it a few times before we were satisfied that it was going to be there. So I think not wasting resources in things that might only be transient is one kind of thing. The other one is our large sort of smolt nursery, you could call it, that's growing animals to 200 grams. I'm aware that I'm speaking in metric, but that's what I'll do. No, 8 1/3 ounces though.
We have to do real-time translations. We can do that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So that's growing animals, caring for them longer before we put them out. But that's a very capital intensive thing to do. And so in that case, we built the facility as large as we could afford to do at the time, but with the view that it was designed from day one to be 4 times bigger. And so as the business needs emerged and as capital was required or available, we would then build the next phase, but design from day one to be larger. So that's kind of another way that we've applied that thinking. When the business that's grown 20,000 times, imagine we had a really big rectangle and we started off just down in one corner. When we'd have to increase the infrastructure, whether that's the power the power supply or whatever the limiting factor was at that time, we might increase the scale of that by 500%. With the view that in 5 or 6 years it would be obsolete again. But at that point, the scale would enable the move to the next level. And so, always with that view to the direction we're going in, we try and make investments in in things that will get us from here to the next few steps ahead. Then we can focus on other bottlenecks. So a lot of the development of the businesses have been around utilizing bottleneck theory, where we look at what's the limiting factor and whether that's a technology or a market. So we can grow the fish, but we can't sell it, or we can sell the fish, but the nursery's not big enough, or whatever the case is. We need to establish genetic leadership, or whatever it is. We would then make that a priority for the coming phase to get that under control. And as the business has grown, we've developed further capacity to be able to do that better and better all the time. So that's enabled us to be an industry-leading company.
Yeah, and on this, similar thread, you've mentioned a few competitors in some cases, or other large operations that it's very easy for the administration to be excited about and fund, and then they were perhaps overambitious and ended up ultimately failing. So could you speak a little bit to some of those risks and maybe just your perspective on why that structure doesn't work? And I guess the reason I'm asking it too is, if part of our struggle in the United States is just the economics of the operation, and then the regulation, which plays into the economics. There's a lot of different threads, but if the government was to incentivize or support a thriving aquaculture industry, what are the lessons they can glean from Australia to do it well? And then in some of these cases where they got a little bit too ambitious, what didn't work and what should we avoid?
For sure. I guess starting small reduces the risk for everybody. So if you imagine, let's say that they're recently going to build the biggest shrimp farm in the world near to us. And there's a couple of lessons there, I guess. Everything is lower risk if you do it smaller, if you treat it as part of the learning journey. In this case, they did nothing material on the site, but did a lot of lobbying and got a lot of administration support to the tune of $130 million, for a lot of it for infrastructure to very remote locations. So there's big concrete bridges over big rivers to a place that grows a few cows at the moment, and looks like that's all it's going to grow for a while. So I'm sure the ranchers appreciate the fancy bridge that they've got, but but very, very expensive. Whereas if they had sent 10 smart farmers with a couple of bulldozers and excavators out there a decade ago when they started talking, they probably would have learnt a few things and understood whether the business case was ever there. Whereas in reality, that money was all spent without the growth of a single animal. And so that's really, I think, starting things on a small scale reduces the risk for the regulators as well, because if the regulator has to contemplate something on a massive scale, they have certainly our regulators tend to be very risk adverse. And so how can you prove that there might not be an impact on the future with this thing that we've got no experience at? So it's all theory that can cost you millions of dollars in consultant studies and monitoring and the like. Whereas if you start small, you can measure what the real discharges are and what the real impact is on a smaller scale. Then scaling that up is relatively easy. So that, it's less risky for business, it's less risky for regulation. So that's kind of a philosophy that we advocate. Potentially you can get to a time when everything is well understood, but if you're in the pioneering phase, it's very risky to go out and do something huge if it hasn't been done in your environment, with your species, with your people, in a comparable situation. The other one is around, when I was doing my Nuffield scholarship, I traveled 20 weeks through 20 countries, a couple of trips to the States, which was great. And I had the opportunity to go to the NAQA, the National Aquaculture Company in Saudi Arabia. And it was a mind-boggling scale operation owned by a couple of wealthy Arab financiers who own banks and the like. And I think they cross-loan money. I don't know how it worked. But, they had 60 kilometres of ponds to drive past. It was just, 50 miles of ponds driving past. The scale was massive. They'd had a huge disease outbreak. White spot disease had wiped out the niche prawn variety. They were growing Penaeus indicus, I think, getting very high prices for it. Apparently it's not very resistant to white spot and was decimated. They then went into trying to grow barramundi in those ponds on scale. They came to visit us and said, "What's your advice as pioneers?" And we said, "Well, start small. Often our first idea is not correct. So let's test it. We cannot be small. We must be large." Okay. So they spent a couple of $100 million, and I went there 3 years later, and they had managed to grow some fish. But firstly, they stocked 300 10-hectare ponds with barramundi, and then discovered that they were unable to harvest them out of those ponds because the fish did not behave in the same way that shrimp behave in a harvesting sense. So that was a bit they basically just released them, I understand. And then they didn't realize how to sell them. And so that had other implications for them financially. And so, when a business, and there's the technical risk, but there's also the financial risk. People say, you know, so that's not a viable business. And they said, just make it bigger. I said, that's good. That makes your losses bigger. So I think the fundamentals, you know, we have to make sense if you can explain them in, if I had 1 kilo of fish, of prawns, whatever, and this is the economics. If I do more kilos, it's just a multiple of that. If the number is a negative, it's going to be a big negative. So right. To me, that's really the fundamental lessons. And we've observed this domestically and globally again and again. With industries, I mean, because it's food and often the financials, you know, the metrics are often very tight. You know, there's often not huge margins. And if there are huge margins, somebody is going to be targeting your margins sometime soon. So, you know, sustainable high margins are often challenging. We've seen in our environment, we're in a place where there's a lot of mineral wealth. And we've seen that, you know, large-scale mining operations that are then tapping into global commodity markets when the conditions are right can develop quickly at scale and successfully, you know, unlocking huge amounts of capital. But in businesses like farming, we haven't seen that succeed very often.
Right. So I want to pull on the thread of just learning and research and share, because I think that's another kind of key that I took away from my visit with you, and I know it's something you're passionate about. But we have kind of a quick fire list of questions from one of our attendees here. I don't know if you can see the Q&A function on your screen, Dan. Otherwise, I'll just read them to you. So,
oh yes, hang on, I'll click on it. Yep.
Is that list coming up?
Hatchery. Do you have broodstock, a genetic pool? What is the average size of each pond? Wow, technical person. Yeah, cool.
You want to do a run through those really quick?
So we can, I can basically say we have our own hatchery and genetics. I think I mentioned that at the start. We've got a partnership with the Australian Peak Science Agency, who helps us do the work. I think we actually send the genetic samples to the US, to a lab in the US to get them tested. So we have, yeah, they're sort of, I don't know, hectare ponds. And we were using brackish water. And we have a health management system. So we don't use natural feed, we use formulated feed. You know, the volumes we're using and biosecurity risk of natural feed is not viable. So yeah, we're basically running I think of it as a bit like a feedlot, I guess. We've got everything from the genetics. We're you know, 6 years into that program and are seeing measurable, significant genetic gain. We've got a Barramundi Tinder app. With the genetic profile of all of the animals, and we say you can breed, you can't breed, and the peculiarity of barramundi. So so they can swipe left, or I don't know what they do. I'm too old for that stuff. But they have a barramundi have an interesting peculiarity that they're all born boys, and they turn into girls when they've basically had enough access to calories, because it's harder work. You know, girls are sexier, so their chance of being successful when they breed is higher than it is for a male. But the investment of energy to achieve that is higher. And so animals that have low access to calories will tend to remain male for a lot and grow to a much bigger size while remaining male. Animals that get lots, conversely, animals that get a lot of nutrition early will transition to females early. That does add a level of complexity when you're growing, you're trying to do a breeding program, when you put the cows and the bulls in the paddock together and you come back and they're all cows.
So caught on the Barramundi Tinder, but that's very helpful. Thank you, Dan, for running through those. So I wanna go back to your, one of the key themes, and you talk about this in just in your model, right? Survive, learn, grow. And I kind of want to pull on that thread of learning. In particular, you have, I'm hoping you speak to your research facility and some of the trials that you do and why. But more importantly is how did you embrace that early, right? So when you didn't have a research facility and you were still scaling 30, year over year in the early decade, right? What was the learning culture and practices that you implemented that helped you grow, but didn't, sink a, small and growing company or growing farm?
So yes, I think there's a couple of different elements to that. One of them, I think, is having a vision. So my father is a visionary. So imagine we're there beside a small pond surrounded by mud and mosquitoes and crocodiles, and he's saying, one day there will be a big farm over there. And really, that's you've got a really great imagination, So, but having that vision on where the business needs to go is part of it, so that you have a direction within which to invest your, where your lesson. But to get there, we're going to need to learn these things, basically. So I think having a direction on where you want to head is an important element to that. We've always had for a long time, our resources, we had very limited resources. So that helps you to embrace the idea of learning cheaply. So, when we have a concept, we will ask the question, how quickly and cheaply can we learn that lesson? And so that's another way. Is there something else out there in the world that we can adopt, or is there something that we need to develop ourselves? So looking at where your opportunities are for learning that. And the other thing is, really targeting, and from a small enterprise that's emerging and trying to see where to go, really doing a 2-second back of the envelope understanding on what's the likely return on investment if I get this right, marginal return analysis, which is a big word. Basically means you're going to get your money back, and how quickly can you get it back, and how big is that opportunity, and focusing your efforts in there, because there's inevitably a endless list of things that you could look at. But looking at the one, I always think what's going to really move the dial for our business, and something, whatever that is at the time is important. If you've got water quality issues, it might be, how do I resolve the water quality? If you've got, financial viability issues, what are the things I can do to cut my costs? If there's a significant market opportunity and you've got the jump on the market, how quickly can I develop that opportunity? Right. To exploit the early mover advantage, while I can. So,
can you talk about your research facility today? So now that you have scaled, what value does that add? I know you talked about one day you basically had a problem and pointed to the open lot and started the building process. What led to that decision, and then what ROI has it had since it opened? I guess has it been a few years? How many years has it been open?
Only about 18 months since we commissioned our dedicated R&D facility. So prior to that, we started off with very limited means, and so for a long time, we really only had resources to focus on production. So, human comfort and, novel questions were fairly out of the equation. And, with the scale that we're operating at, we had an inability to test things like feed on scale, outside of doing it on scale. So, it might be someone's got a suggestion that something could be better. Well, do I want to bet $1 million on that question, because that's the minimum production unit that I've got to play with, or whatever, Right. To do a replicated trial and that sort of thing, So that meant the risk of doing research was much higher than it is today. And so then it is if you've got an area to play in. So to us, that was one thing that for a long time, we didn't have that ability to really test. So when we had an issue with our feed and we wanted to get to the bottom of what was actually going on there, there was a pressing need to move past that point. And so at that point, we actually made the decision to develop an R&D facility. And as you indicated there, we like to move fast when we can. And so I said, we're going to build it. It's going to go there. We'd been thinking about ideas for a while, and we're going to start today. And so we started that day, moving dirt and building a pad, and Right. within 3 months it was operational, and so that's given us the opportunity to to test ideas, whether that's a handling method or a feed formulation, or there's something wrong with that, let's test it on fish in scientific conditions. So since that, in that last 18 months, we've been running replicated trials every 3 months. We're half a dozen trials in now. This is focused on fish at the moment, and so we're really getting accelerated learning, and so that's in a dedicated space. We've also now got a dedicated R&D team who are tasked with answering those questions, and so they're really, obviously, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then everybody else in the business, they all want to know what that is. And when you're looking at things, our biggest cost is feed. Let's look at, efficient feed utilization, or, is this new feed that the feed company is promoting worth the extra cost or not? And even that can depend on the market conditions for this at the sale price, because when the market price is good, then just growing more fish can be the most sensible strategy. When the market price is not good, growing more into that environment is not necessarily smart, but growing it at a lower cost can be. So I think the more we're doing these things, the more we're understanding what levers we've got to pull, and the more you learn, the more you want to learn. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, it seems to go perfectly in line with that modular thinking and starting small and iterating and growing there and learning along the way. Well, now it just seems that facility has drastically improved the velocity of your learning, right? And you're able to test small and fail small in those trials that you've talked about. And it's really just, I think it's brilliant and something to admire and something to draw and take away to our growers as well. I have one last maybe thread. We'll try to keep this. We have about 7 minutes left in our scheduled time, but we can go a little over depending on when you have to start your day. So 2 questions on the Q&A. You mentioned working with other groups and animals. What is the Aboriginal Oyster Program?
So we've got a large, as I mentioned, dispersed, disadvantaged Aboriginal population in the territory. And they are starved of hope and opportunity. Well, there is opportunity, but Aboriginal people, Australian Aboriginal people, are very much in our part of in where we are, they are living with elements of very traditional culture. They are very much part of that is being tied to place. And so, these people are not, they're mobile, but they're basically, their roots are out on country, which has very limited services and opportunities. And so there's an emerging oyster industry or oyster opportunity. The government has been doing work on the hatchery phase to try and reliably produce juveniles, because at the moment that is not established for this tropical species. The Pacific oysters, and there's a range of other species that are farmed at scale in the south of Australia, that are successful in large scale operations, big corporates and the like. So these are small operations, either community or family led, in remote locations, in pioneering new species. And so and we've had 3 separate communities talk to us about help and collaboration. And so we felt part of our role, our mission, should have started with it, is to responsibly produce beautiful Australian barramundi or seafood while demonstrating our genuine care and commitment to our people. So our people is internal, our team, as well as our community, which includes our Aboriginal community, our fish, which is all about animal welfare and, stewardship, environmental stewardship. So that's about our water and our wildlife and our natural resource use and all that sort of things, and our partners. And so that's kind of the underlying philosophy that underpins our whole business. And so for us, working closely with those communities to help them thrive is something that we can contribute to, and we think it's an important role for business, and one that we can help, because we have experience at pioneering new species in this region, and there aren't many companies who have that. And so we feel that that's something that we can move the dial with them, for them, and part of that will be coaching them on the journey and this technique and strategies that we've used. Whether that industry can achieve the premium that they would need to achieve to look at the extra logistics costs and the like from that remote location, compared to large scale conventional oyster farming, is a different question, but perhaps that's not the primary question. That these communities need hope and meaningful activities, and I think we can assist with that. And we will no doubt learn as much as they will on the journey, and hopefully we'll be able to help them on their journey. So.
Excellent. Mike Miller has a question on any preventative measures to keep crocs from damaging paddle wheels.
Okay, so we have crocodile exclusion fence along our river frontage, and we have a deal with the crocodiles. And the deal is that's their side of the fence. This is my side of the fence. And whoever goes on the wrong side of the fence is probably ultimately going to die. And so I try not to go on their side of the fence. That's probably the first part. Once the crocodiles are in, we have a spotting, we have night shift. So it's a 24/7 operation at our scale, who are keeping an eye on the animals and the equipment. And they have spotlights, and they can spotlight to identify the crocodiles where they are. And then we will set traps for those during the day. We have a guy who's a bit like Crocodile Dundee, who'll go out there with a harpoon and catch them if they're small, but if they're large, we'll trap them. And so basically, we have 2 species of crocodiles in Australia, and we have 2 species of crocodiles on our farm. The saltwater crocodile is, the most prolific, and they will grow to in excess of 5 meters. And so they are a serious danger to people and property, particularly people. Let's say getting eaten by a crocodile, they could eat 1,000 fish and we wouldn't notice, but if they eat one person, that's a really big deal. And so it's our duty to keep our people safe. So those animals can't stay there. They're managed under CITES and all of that sort of thing. So we do it as part of the state's catch. And we send them then to a farm or research facility or tourism operator, depending on the animal and what their use is, what their requirement is at that size. Some of them, they said, wow, that's got an exceptional scale pattern. We want that to join the breeding program, or that's a huge one. We need a breeder for the, for tourism or whatever. So it just depends. But obviously, priority one is to keep our people safe, and we mitigate their opportunity to get in as much as possible. But at the moment, we're in the middle of monsoonal rains, and we're surrounded by water, and crocodiles are very active and moving, and they will come into the farm. So once they're in your pond, there's not much you can do. I mean, we've had issues in the past, in the early days when we were running less paddle wheels and the like, that they bite the paddle wheel cord. The residual current device saves them, so that they're not injured, but all the fish die. So the cost was a lot higher in that case.
Well, it's good that you prioritize people over paddle wheels.
Yeah. It's only stuff.
Excellent. Well, that is the top of our hour here, and I want to be conscious and appreciative of your time, Dan. So any parting words, maybe the last thing, and we talked about it a little bit on and off, but the last thing, if you wouldn't mind ending on, is just your perspective and the importance of your people and your team. Because it's difficult to share that through a webinar, but it's very prevalent when you're hosting and showing people on your farm, right? And really admired how, as you went around, you knew your team. It wasn't just a person on the farm, and it's very clear that there's some fun interactions and that you genuinely care, right? And I would argue that's one of the keys to your success. And I have to imagine that if you're that way, your family embodies that as well. So could you just speak to the importance of people and how you approach that to send us home here?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ways I think about, we do quite a lot of things with our people and with our community. We've got an active youth program that's bringing young, kids in from school the schooling system doesn't work for everybody. And so we've got, young people who will come in for work experience and then can continue on in the business. And we've empowered our team really embrace those sort of opportunities. We see it as an important role as an employer, as a member of your community to help young people on their journey, help everybody on their journey, and to show your genuine care and commitment to them as per our mission. And I've had people challenge me to say, yeah, but how does that work in business? Well, to me, it comes naturally. You should be thinking about, how would I like to be treated? How would I like my child to be treated if they were in a work environment? Do I want them to be abused, or do I want them to, I want them to be steered, and I want them to have opportunities and to grow and learn and be safe. So I think, a lot of these things are just human and natural. It's also, I feel, good for business. There's no misalignment between treating and developing your people to help them maximize their life opportunities is completely aligned with growing your business, because confident, capable, empowered people can often, certainly when we're at the stage we are, they can run my business a lot better than me. They are the experts in their field, and they deserve that respect. And so to me, it's a natural thing. It is part of our family. We don't really value status and the like. When I go to work, I wear the same shirt as everybody else, and new people come and I just, hi, I'm Dan. And, everybody has a job to do. I have a different job to do. I've done a lot of those jobs. So I appreciate the good and bad parts of those. So have full respect for everybody, from the cleaners, the hygiene team who are, ensuring that we maintain our food safety standards, through to the people that the fish whisperers and the night duty people who aren't in bed with their families. They're going around doing that work, and I couldn't run the business without those people. I can't even turn the lights on myself, the scale that we're operating. And so having those people there, I also think that your business isn't a prison. People have other opportunities. A lot of businesses talk about, oh, I can't get people and I can't retain people and that sort of thing. And touch wood, that hasn't been a big issue for us, because our turnover in those core roles tends to be, in virtually all the roles, tends to be very low. And so we're developing capacity and capability in people, building a family environment where they feel part of something that's bigger, that, people, whether it's the sporting team or whatever, or family, people want to be part of something. And I think creating that is great. And we hear from a lot of our competitors that we have something I've sort of come up with. We talk about COP, is cost of production, and some others have COP, which is cost on people. And if you're not looking after your people and you're continuing to, burn them out, that's not sustainable. That's not a sustainable way to grow your business. And so that's really something that we've observed. And then sometimes those people come and knock on our door, and we welcome them as new family members who we hadn't met yet. So
That's excellent. Cost on people, right? COP, cost on people. There you go. Let's take away from the whole webinar. Excellent. Well, Dan, I can't thank you enough for taking time. I know it's early there, but this was great. It was great to catch up just personally, and hopefully our attendees found value in that. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll have to connect soon.
Sounds great. Great to see you. And I hope everybody found it interesting. Take care.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. And if there's anything SAA or I can do to help you or your businesses, let me know. But really appreciate you taking some time out of the end of your day here, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.